A world-first study has revealed some concerning statistics on the effects of internet addiction on the brains of teenagers. Jill Sweatman, neuroscience strategist in learning and development, joins me now. Jill, a very interesting report. I mean, we often hear the word addiction when it comes to children's computer devices. Can you describe to me what actually happens to the brain when children are on these devices?
I'd love to, Janie. You see, what happens with devices is that the part of the brain that is looking specifically at creating dopamine and also the craving part of the brain, it in fact becomes enlarged. And it becomes enlarged at the expense of the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain here that really doesn't develop until the late 20s. And it is slow to develop. So what we have is a part of the brain that is really looking at entertainment. It's looking at being fed constantly with rewards, being entertained. That is in fact changing the structure of the brain at the expense of the prefrontal cortex, which is what we need for self-regulation. It's what we need for making sure that we can plan ahead, that we can strategize, that we can regulate ourselves and be able to determine what's right and create some restrictions and limits in our own life.
And what came out of this report?
Well, it was profound, and I think the first thing that we have to notice in this particular report is that if we look at Australia as a society, this has become a societal issue because we are not at all paying heed to the World Health Organization guidelines for how many times that we should be using our devices, and certainly the amount of time. And the World Health Organization suggests that children under the age of 2 should have no device time at all. And yet this particular report shows that children, toddlers, are getting 14 hours a week. Now, somehow we're ignoring the fact that devices are in fact changing the way children learn, changing the way children communicate. And certainly I see in the work I do now as a private tutor and also working as a parent coach that children are really being affected in their ability to read, in their ability to learn. It affects their short-term memory, and it also affects significantly their long-term memory, so they don't have the ability to recall. And, Janie, this is significant.
It certainly is. And how much of it do you think is with our culture? Because I believe, for example, France is leading the way with devices known not to be good parenting. So how do we support families and carers in a non-shaming way to perhaps change certain habits?
Yeah, I was on a plane last year and I was watching a young mother working with her little girl, and I commented and I said, it's just lovely to see you engaged so beautifully, and I noticed that you haven't given your child a device. And she said, in Europe, it's considered bad parenting to put a device in front of a child. Now, I thought, isn't that interesting that culturally France is rather committed to really paying attention to what technology is doing to the structure of the brains. And it was President Macron who was the first in the world to suggest that children don't have mobile phones at schools. Now, Janie, I think you would agree that if we're talking about the structure of children's brains and how the internet is affecting that, I don't think we have a more important topic to discuss.
Very, very important indeed. And finally, can you tell us a little bit about the latest PISA program for international student assessment tests, because there's some alarming results in that as well?
Well, there are. And since PISA was instigated, we found ourselves in Australia dropping in each of the subject areas each time, whether it's mathematics, whether it's reading, whether it's science. And what it's showing is that on a world stage, we're losing track. And even our NAPLAN results show that as well. It is so important that children have the opportunity to read and to read deeply. And to be reading from a screen is very different to reading a physical book. And, you know, one of the most beautiful things a parent can do for a child is to read with them. And so the children hear language, they hear vocabulary, they're able to pick up the cadence of voices, of the rhythm. And, you know, it seems like a small thing, but but it's not.
Very important information. Thank you very much, Jill Sweatman, neuroscience strategist in learning and development, for coming on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.